my reporting partner, Stephen Janis, and this is a special live stream report where you, the viewers, can weigh in and interact with us while we discuss some of our latest findings in a special investigation of a small town accused of overzealous policing. And please remember, this is live, so there may be a few technical difficulties along the way, so please try and be patient with us. And Stephen is on leave from his outdoor duties, and since this is a special occasion, I want to check in with him. Stephen, what's it like being in the great indoors?
Well, it's very unsettling. I'm really not used to being inside. I don't necessarily like it. I've become a creature of the outdoors, so I'm really hoping that once this is done, you'll let me go back outside. But just for tonight, just so we can have this discussion and talk about, I'm willing to report from inside, and I'll get used to it, but go back outside, okay, please?
Don't worry, I shall set you free, and you may go back into the wild blue yonder, okay?
Okay, thank you.
So first, I just want to welcome everyone to our second PAR live stream. And I want to mention that I will be thanking my wonderful Patreon patrons at the end. So don't make sure to look out for your name. And we are actually trying to raise a little money tonight. We're hoping that we can raise $1,000 tonight to send the police accountability report. That means me and Stephen on the road to investigate over policing in communities just like Milton. And we wouldn't have been able to take on the police in Milton this year without your help. And we're asking for your help because their news outlets in Milton, they simply can't or they won't report on over policing. So we may not have a huge budget like the police department, but we have you. So if people feel inspired to chip in a few bucks, we could probably meet our goal. So if you can, even $1 makes a difference. So just keep it in mind. And if you do, we really appreciate it. All right. On to the rest of the investigation. As you know, the point of this show is always to hold police accountable, but we also feel like it's equally important to connect with you. In fact, it's often you, our viewers, who inspire us with tips and story ideas. So that's why we felt it was important to create a forum where you could ask us questions and get updates from past stories, and of course, discuss the current state of American policing. And of course, just like we demand accountability for the police, we also need to be held accountable. And that means reporting back to you on our ongoing investigations and letting you know what we uncovered. So to start that off, we want to return to a topic that we did extensive work on before, and that is the city of Milton, West Virginia. Many of you might remember the town from this video. It's the arrest of Cody Cecil. Cecil was, of course, parked in a private campground when the Milton police executed a raid. Cam, if you can do the first clip for Cody Cecil.
Case in point is this video I'm showing you now of Milton, West Virginia police trying to get inside the trailer of a man whose RV had broken down. His name is Cody Cecil, and he was traveling across the country when the brake lines of his RV failed, forcing him to stop in a trailer park in West Virginia. Cody, who is from Michigan, also happens to work for a legal marijuana growing equipment company and had a total of 8 small Delta 8 hemp plants growing inside his RV. That's right, 8 immature hemp plants, which is why police in West Virginia decided that Cody was such a threat to the community that they had to break into his home without a warrant. As you can see in the video we are showing now, police insisted that he let them inside. When Cody, fully aware of his constitutional rights, asked to see the warrant, police kept telling him they would get it soon. Let's listen.
So you're gonna break my stuff violently anyway? Look, my hands are right here. All I'm doing is recording this. That's it. Open the door. I just don't understand why and what's going on. I need to have a lawyer present. You don't have a lawyer present for a search warrant. For a warrant? Why not? This can be done completely peacefully. I just need to see a warrant first. Why are you guys breaking my stuff? I haven't seen a warrant yet. Right now I look like I'm surrounded by a bunch of wolves trying to attack me.
Now you can see our initial interest in that story was, as you can hear, Cody asked for a warrant, but he did not receive it. But it's what we uncovered when we investigated the circumstances of his arrest that started us down a deep rabbit hole in Milton. we found that the city's police force was a ticket writing machine. We learned that tickets, fees, and fines had tripled while the police budget doubled. So we filed a Freedom of Information Act request for all the tickets and fees, which I will turn to Stephen to explain. Stephen, what did we receive? And please make sure to show those documents.
Well, yeah, Taya, it's pretty amazing what we found. I want to show people here what we received from the city of Milton when we did a FOIA request or a Freedom of Information request for every ticket written just over 4 years. And so here is the actual volume. There's about 50 to 60 line items per page. So it's an incredible amount of tickets that have been written. And I think one thing I want to point out right off the bat that's very, very interesting is what you have here are the badge numbers. You can see of the people who wrote the tickets. So what we have heard from police officers, and we'll talk more about this later, what we've heard not from police officers, from people who are familiar with this, is that they were tracking officers here in Milton to see how many tickets they wrote. And you have hundreds of tickets, and not all of them, of course, are just for, speeding. There's a lot of other strange things like failure to, avoid emergency vehicle, tinted windows, failure to signal and to turn. It's clear that if you look at these numbers, they were writing tickets at a prodigious rate. And just look at the volume here we have. I mean, it's an extraordinary amount of tickets, an extraordinary number. It is an extraordinary, signal for a town that has other problems. If you look at the volume of tickets written, clearly this police department is meant to be a cash machine. I think these documents prove it. We are going to post these documents for everyone to see later on so that they can peruse them themselves. But really, it's massive. And I think the big takeaway is, if you're a police officer in Milton, you are going to be tracked. They want to know how many tickets you write. They want to know what you're doing, not about public safety so much as how much revenue you're generating. And of course, this makes sense with what we found before about how ticket writing and fines have gone up significantly in the town, almost tripled in the past 4 or 5 years. So it really is exemplar of a problem in the town. It took us like 2 months to get this, and we had to pay $130 just to get this. I don't know why this isn't available for free to every citizen and every person in that town. It makes no sense to me. It should be available. It should be public record, but we had to fight to get it. We got it. We're going to post it, but it really is kind of a testament to what kind of policing is going on in Milton and why so many people are upset, because, you can just go through this and just see, cell phone violations, seatbelt violations. They were pulling people over under any pretext. So Tay, it's a lot of information. We'll post it, and it certainly shows that this town has put an emphasis on generating cash from policing.
So as we promised, we were going to reveal the information we learned. And thanks to our reporting in the area, and luckily it's been read by a lot of Milton residents, we've been contacted by several confidential sources who have confirmed that the pressure for officers to write tickets is not just intense, but makes it impossible for them to do their jobs. That their officers there want to do preventive policing, that they want to prevent crime, but the pressure to produce tickets and make arrests is very high. And confidential sources told us police are instructed to stop people who are simply walking. They told us there's currently an officer hired to do nothing but sit on the highway and write tickets Monday through Friday. And we heard that the chief keeps a list of officers and the number of tickets they write on his desk on a Post-it note. And Stephen, our confidential sources told us something else worth mentioning. Can you discuss how it relates to our show tonight?
Yeah, I think the most important thing that everyone who's spoken to us off the record about the problems that we're seeing is that they said it's not really fair just to focus on the police department. That it's not really fair to just simply lay the blame at a bunch of officers, but that it's also important and very important to understand that the pressure to do this came from the council and came from the mayor and came from City Hall. And I think that's something we sort of, tend to forget about, is that there is a system and there is a political system, a political hierarchy that wants these tickets to be written. That is supposedly what we've been told is the council would review, and see which officers are more productive or which officers weren't writing tickets. And then, of course, put pressure on those that weren't. So I think it was very important. They want us to emphasize this, that this pressure came from City Hall, and this is City Hall that is setting the policy. And I think that's really, really important to remember. I mean, a lot of times, and even in our own town, we tend to focus on police corruption as a result of bad policing, and that's part of it, or just some of the bad choices that cops make, which is part of it. But all these policies are set by elected officials. Here in the city, we've had horrible problems with police corruption, and for many, many years when I wrote about it, the politicians would look the other way. And I think that's what's going on in Milton. I think the police department is doing the bidding of City Hall, and that shouldn't be forget. And the responsibility really lies on the doorstep of City Hall. I think, Taya, you're familiar with that kind of problem where it comes to policing and politics, and where politics a lot of time, does not intervene or kind of pretends like there's nothing they can do about it, when in fact it really is a policy of City Hall that's making the difference.
Absolutely, Stephen. A lot of times people don't realize that policing is the tip of the spear, that they are being directed by the policymakers. And if you don't like the way you're being policed, you should take a look at who's setting those policies, who is benefiting from all those tickets being written. And you've got to take a look at your politicians. And if you don't like what they're doing, you make sure to vote them out, or maybe even run for office yourself. But it's not just policing that is prompting concerns from Milton residents. We also received tips about a lot of other problems. We pulled on a thread and we couldn't believe what we found. We found complaints about the water system, which residents said was absolutely undrinkable. And Cameron, if you can, run clip 3 about the Milton Water Council meeting. This is a clip from Kelsey Miller.
I love my town, so I'm still here. My husband wants to move. I've grown up here, and I love that I'm raising my kids here. That's why I'm so passionate about the poor water quality and the financial decisions that our city's leadership has chosen to pursue. In 2019, we addressed you with concerns over our dirty water. We were told that it was too expensive to fix all at once. Over those past 2 years, Band-Aids have been applied to broken lines as they've occurred, but our water's still frequently brown. Recently, I had my water tested by the DHHR. My water tested with levels that were 7 times the recommended amount of manganese. 50 parts per billion is the amount the EPA recommends as a safe level. They issue a health advisory at 300 parts per billion. When my water was tested, it ran at 346 parts per billion, and it wasn't even as bad as it usually is. Infants, the elderly, and those with liver disease should avoid food made with the water, like soup. It says the tap water may be used to prepare food such as pasta, where the water is discarded prior to consumption. And then it says contact your doctor. If you have specific health concerns, you may wish to consult with a medical professional. That came straight from the EPA's website in a public notice that was required to be given.
So you hear that and you listen that she actually went and got her water tested, 336 parts per million, that the manganese levels were so high in the water that children under 6 months shouldn't drink it. People with liver disorders shouldn't drink it. The elderly shouldn't drink it. And also that the city council gave them an advisory, oh, well, just boil your water. Well, it turns out boiling your water actually concentrates those sediments. So you have to wonder, what is the city council thinking here? And Stephen, I know you dug into the city's water system. What did you find?
Well, yeah, I mean, so, I looked at the EPA sort of violations, and the EPA keeps a list of violations of specific local water systems. And Milton had at least a dozen in one year and a half a dozen another. Many of them were for non-reporting violations or violations of certain carcinogens being highly concentrated in the water. It was a pretty poor track record. I also looked, if you go to the Milton Water Company website, you'll see that they didn't follow water quality as of the last time I looked since 2019. So there are a lot of violations that have sort of piled up, and they're not being fully addressed. And one of the things I think is interesting is that let's compare that. Let's do a little comparison. You can't drink the water, but you got this, right? So your government's been quite effective at writing tickets and punishing people, but not so effective at actually making the water drinkable. And I think that's a big problem. And also, the question has been raised by many people to us: what happened to the money we've been paying? There've been rate increases, et cetera. So I think we're going to show that clip first, and then we can talk about that, right, Taya?
Sure. I'm sorry, which clip did you want? You said in relation to rate increases? Sure. Okay, Stephen, which clip did you want? You got to tell me.
Which
clip did you want?
Oh, well, talking about the second clip of the water clip, the second clip.
Oh,
Before I
okay.
go into the thing about, what we learned about how they're financing it.
Okay. So this is what happens when it's live, people. You got to take a look for your clips. Let me see if I can find that. Really click here. I have found it, and here we go.
Also concerned as a taxpayer. It was recently brought to my attention that the city's trying to introduce a bond that would increase our sewer bills by 18%. This is concerning because our rates also were increased a couple of years ago. My question is, who decided to pursue a sewer project before addressing the aging infrastructure that causes Milton's residents to have brown water that has potentially negative health effects?
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. Absolutely amazing. So, I mean, I know this brings us to a topic that's not directly related to policing, but
Right.
I think it's really important to talk about. And you're going to say, why is she talking about this when we're just talking about water? I
Well,
promise you, I'm sorry, Stephen. I know there's something you want to say. And then
one
I've
thing
got to
that's
tie this in.
really interesting is that while the city was ratcheting up police spending and almost doubling the police budget from $430,000 to roughly $1 million a year, obviously they weren't spending money on fixing the water system. And what I found looking through the records in Cabell County was that the city sort of thrown what would be sort of a political Hail Mary. They applied for about $7.9 million through the American Reinvestment Act, which was passed ironically by the Democrats back in last year to fight COVID. And they've applied for about $7.9 million to fix the water system. But, one has to wonder, and this is where we talk about the idea of how bad policing and bad public policy go hand in hand. While they were sitting there, sending people out to write all these tickets, and I hate to keep showing this prop, but it's very, very important to this, to be able to visualize this. They weren't putting money into the water system. So instead of trying to fix the water system, now they're trying to take a big chunk of money, from the federal government to fix the city's water system, instead of using the money that the ratepayers have been paying for water to fix the water system. And one has to wonder what they thought was going to happen. I mean, it's kind of like a certain amount of insanity. So you might not be able to drink your water, but here's a ticket. Like your water is undrinkable. Sorry about that, but I can write you a ticket for walking down the street. I can write you a ticket for failure to use a turn signal, or I can write you a ticket for equipment work order, and the next thing you know, you don't have a license anymore. I mean, I think it's utterly, to me, confounding to think about how a city that has a clear problem with providing healthy drinking water could, at the same time, spend money for this. For hundreds of pages worth of tickets. I don't understand it. I mean, why wouldn't you fix the water so people can drink it? What exactly do you expect people to do? So I think that's, a big part of our finding was that what happened, that this sort of emphasis on over policing actually created, I don't know, some sort of brain fog in the city council where they couldn't make the right decision about keeping the people, people without drinking water are not safe, right?
Absolutely. And Stephen, you mentioned what's going on with the city council. They actually, Kelsey Mueller mentions in that meeting that her taxes have gone up 18% to fund a sewer system, but that sewer system is not fixing the water. And as a matter of fact, that sewer infrastructure that's being fixed is going to another project. It will not be helping people's water in the city of Milton. It will be helping a hotel that's about to be built. And this hotel is the Grand Patrician Hotel. It is a luxury resort being built in Milton as we speak. The project will have 100 rooms, a 300-seat wedding chapel, a banquet hall, a 500-seat ballroom, 2 indoor pools, one of them Olympic-sized, and a 1930s-style speakeasy and a 9-hole golf course. Oh, there's more. There is a second phase of the development that plans an amphitheater to fit 3,500 people, styled after the Roman Colosseum, and soccer and baseball fields, and 3 gated residential areas for 200 homes. These are big plans for Milton, but is it the Milton residents who will be getting access to all this luxury? But how it's being financed and who it's going to benefit is going to be the focus of what Stephen's going to talk about, okay? But let me just tell you, the person who is creating the Grand Patrician Hotel is none other than Jeff Hoops. Who is Jeff Hoops? Well, he happened to be the CEO of Black Jewel Coal. Oh, and by the way, they went bankrupt in 2019, and when they went bankrupt, miners lost their wages, lost their job, and the company actually tried to take back the paychecks they had already given to the miners. So this CEO who bankrupted a company is now going to be opening a luxury hotel thanks to Milton residents. And Stephen, why don't you explain a little bit about the tax break that he's receiving?
Well, Tay, thank you. And yes, Black Jewel Coal was a catastrophic bankruptcy, a catastrophic mess that left all sorts of things, even including 200 sites across the country that don't have any money for remediation or reclamation. Right. Yeah, so it's an utter disaster. So what happened was that the city council, in one meeting, and there are two components of this whole thing, that the deal that gave this guy really what could conceivably be millions of dollars, sold him a 173-acre property that used to belong to the city, that used to house a hospital built during the 1930s called the Morris Memorial Hospital. Sold him 173 acres in two separate deals for the whopping grand total of $10 a piece, or $20 total without tax. Yeah. So that was the first part of the deal. So $20 for 173 acres sounds like a pretty good deal.
Wait a second. Okay, I don't want that to fly by people. You have to forgive me. Every once in a while, I'm like looking into the comments. I thought I heard you say that he got all of that land for $20.
Yes.
Let's just roll that back one more time. How much money did he pay for the land?
Yeah, according to land records, the Cabell County, recorder of land records, the council sold the land to him in two separate deals: 123 acres for $10 and 53 additional acres for $10. A total grand total of $20 for 173 acres. Now, to be fair, the council in the ordinance that actually approved the sale said that the land had been abandoned and it was in disrepair, and they hadn't found any way to monetize it or develop it, so that they sold it at this price because it was basically, a vacant lot, let's say. But, I think people can question that. We had heard from some people that someone had been renting the land from the city for grazing, so that it wasn't completely unusable. And I think there are a lot of people who would like 173 acres in beautiful West Virginia for $20. I know I might think about building a house there. So, that's number one of the deal. But the second part of the deal that's even, I think, more lucrative is what's known as a TIF. It's a special tax incentive given to businesses by desperate locales that are trying to raise business. It was initially an idea to get developers to build on land that was considered abandoned or otherwise vacant. And so basically what happens is that the real estate developer who builds on the land gets to put all the new property taxes they generate back into the project. They basically get them back. So as you were saying, we were talking beforehand, I think you had a pretty good analogy of how a TIF works. Basically means that if you or I, wanted to put an addition on our house, and we said, we're going to put $100,000 addition, all the new property taxes collected against our property would go back to us. For what this means for the Grand Patrician Hotel is that $10 million of taxes going forward will all go back into the pocket of the developer. Now, the developer says they're going to use this to build roads, et cetera, et cetera. But of course, that's usually the responsibility of someone who's building a project. They have to pay for roads and infrastructure. But in this case, the taxpayers in Milton are going to be foregoing $10 million. Now, it doesn't end there, because actually that includes interest on bonds, because these projects are backed by bonds. So what happens is, once they figure out how much tax they're going to give back to the developer, instead of giving it back to them by saying you don't have to pay taxes, they get all the money up front. So the $10 million is gotten by the city by issuing bonds at 5%. Well, miraculously, Jeff Hoops, from the documents we obtained, so we obtained the TIF application, the application for this tax break, from the West Virginia Economic Development Agency. And it says quite specifically that these $10 million in bonds were bought by an entity controlled by Jeff Hoops, the same guy who's in bankruptcy court right now, saying that, he has been broke. He has been, sort of, I wouldn't say broke. He's not arguing he's broke, but doesn't have any money and can't pay back some of the bills that have been incurred and some of the back pay of Black Jewel, because he doesn't have the cash to do it. In fact, he's owed cash, but at that same time, he had enough money to buy bonds. So $10 million worth of bonds, it means he's going to make interest. It's a little complicated, but the point is, in the end, according to the application, he will have a hotel that will be worth $128 million, an entire facility, but he will not have to pay taxes. And so that vaunted police department that is costing the city of Milton $1 million a year will cost.
This is extraordinary.
He will be contributing absolutely 0 cents to that, 0 to the water infrastructure. He will not be paying for that sewer.
Right.
So really, all these things are the taxpayers. Now you say, what are they getting for this? Well, they're putting.
That's a good question.
Well, if the documents we obtained, it's going to be 46 jobs permanent jobs and 200 part-time jobs. That's it. 240 jobs, maybe, right? And 200 of them part-time. And the other thing that was really interesting in this application, and by the way, all of this will be posted. We have a story where we've written up all our findings, and we're going to post it. We would do it after we do our announcement. And all these documents will be downloaded so you can read them. It's not, so don't take our word for it. I actually ask you to read them and let me know if you see anything that we missed. But he bragged about being one of the biggest landholders in the country, one of the top 100 or top 10 landowners in the country, that he controlled $2 billion worth of unmined assets. And I mean, I think it's just a really interesting dichotomy here you have. You have on the one hand, people can't drink the water, getting tickets for everything. Now, on the other hand, you have a city council giving one guy, one individual, one person who, already took a coal mining, huge firm, ran into the ground and ripped off coal miners. And they're giving him millions of dollars to build a hotel, which of course, I think one of the saddest things about it is, do we know it will even work? It's quite possible that the taxpayers of Milton could end up on the hook if the hotel is not able to make its taxes or make those payments on the bonds, because it turns out that, the property itself is really the guarantor of the bond. So I know this is weird, but I want you to think of a scenario where the hotel fails, right? And the taxpayers of Milton are paying back Jeff Hoops for the bonds. In other words, they're paying back a rich guy 5% for his failed business. And I ask you a question, given his track record, is this a guy you want to entrust with taxpayer money? So you have the people in Milton, on one hand, have this over-policing that's making people's lives miserable, a tax break to a guy who went fabulous, notoriously bankrupt. I think it just it's sort of writ large some of the problems with inequality in this country, not just inequality of resources, but inequality of imagination. I mean, is this the best you can do for people? Maybe if you had wonderful, clean drinking water and show that you invest in infrastructure or education, you'd attract more people and more business. But this type of dichotomy, and the other thing that, just one more thing I want to mention, I was thinking about when I was looking at these documents and when I was going through them and thinking about how Jeff Hoops has failed miserably, but is now getting millions of dollars and hundreds of acres. West Virginia has been a victim of the opioid epidemic, mostly because big pharma companies just absolutely inundated the area with opioid pills, with oxycodone and things like that. And no one has gone to jail, right? Nobody has been punished. Not a single person is doing jail time because they literally were killing people with opioids. In West Virginia, Huntington, which is 30 miles away from Milton, it was once called the overdose capital of the world. Netflix did a documentary about it. So all these people are doing this. But if you look at these documents, you can't even walk down the street in Milton. You can't take a wrong turn or forget to turn your turn signal on. They're all over you. Your taillight doesn't work. You're going to jail. We'll put you on our Facebook page. We'll humiliate you. We'll fine you. But all the people who made billions off drug dealing, legally killing people in this country, where was the Milton police then? Where was law enforcement? Is Milton going to help out the people who have fallen on hard times, who can't afford their taxes? Because I saw, going through the land records, a lot of town repossession of property. I didn't see them giving people any breaks. I saw a lot of situations where the council has been foreclosing on people's property, but I don't see them giving them tax breaks or saying, you know what, we'll let you settle your tax. We'll let you settle your tax lien for $10. Doesn't happen. And there's the problem. Why isn't there equal opportunity here? Why is only one guy getting all this money? And then when anybody goes down the street and steps on something and the police are right there following right behind you, I think it's exemplar of a lot of problems, Taya. And I think it's something that, we have to connect the dots here. That's what we do on the show. That's why it's so important.
I think that's absolutely what we're trying to do. We're trying to connect the dots. And I was thinking the people who showed up to that water council meeting, I bet they would love their own TIF to be able to invest their property taxes and perhaps get themselves like a water osmosis unit where you can actually filter out water. I'm sure they would like to not have to pay property taxes, but unfortunately they do. And I'm really not sure why Jeff Hoops gets to reinvest his property taxes into this incredibly lucrative development. And some people pointed out in the chat as well, if this thing even gets built. I mean, we've seen things fail here in our own city. I mean, in our hometown of Baltimore, they've done the same policy approach as Milton: tax cuts for the richest of the rich and big spending on policing. And we did an investigation here in our hometown, and we found out that our city had awarded almost $1 billion worth of tax breaks while spending half the budget on policing. But what I think is most important to point out is that this policy hasn't worked. We have a huge police department. We spend millions of dollars on it, but we're not any safer. We're currently at a record pace of violence this year, and the city continues to lose residents. We continue to lose population. So why do both big cities and small towns employ this type of policy if it doesn't even work? Stephen, I know that's kind of an impossible question to ask you, but why do cities and small towns keep doing this if it doesn't make anyone safer?
Well, I think the main driver of this kind of policy is inequality, because as we've seen in many cases, inequality begets inequality, right? And in Baltimore, for example, has some of the highest property taxes in the region, and that is sort of purposeful. The city has been purposely divided from the surrounding area, so it gives a way of heightening inequality. Inequality tends to beget inequality. Because what happens is really a political economy grows around it, just like policing. For many, many years, the police had so much political influence because policing was our biggest line item in the budget, and all that money got circulated back in the political system. Well, when you have rich developers, it's the same thing. They are circulating that money. They're getting right back into the pockets of politicians. And so politicians keep giving out these tips. We've spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on tax work. We really created a city where there's like pockets of people, rich people who don't pay taxes. And then everyone else has to bear the burden of the expense. And I think that's why, and right in the middle of that is policing, right? You punish people for being poor and you reward them for being rich. It's something that I think comes out of sort of the cancerous inequity that we see in this country in many cases. That's why inequality is really an issue that goes beyond just what's fair. Do I have as much as he or she has? Rather, it's an issue of keeping a balance in a political system and good public policy. It just reinforces itself. And once these sort of political economies grow and become sort of de facto rule of the way things work, it's very impossible to break them. We've seen that on our own level, covering legislation here, and even in Milton. I don't see any rollback on any of these policies. And I mean, they're committed. And you bring up a good point. This hotel is the projections say it's going to be 70% full. Well, how is that possible? It's very hard to get to Milton. But they've pretty much committed millions and millions of dollars of poor taxpayers' money, people that can barely afford it, so that they can take a big risk on a hotel. It might work, but it might not. But I think it's very interesting the way policing. You ramp up policing, then you start giving tax breaks to the very wealthy. Same thing here in Baltimore City. Guess what? We have a record number of homicides this year. So it's not working. Our population is still declining. So if you like that policy mix, I urge other communities to try it. It's really going to work out. It hasn't worked out here, and it doesn't seem to work out anywhere else. And I don't understand it.
Stephen, you made some really good points. Unfortunately, they're not very happy ones, because we see what the problem is. I feel like we've diagnosed it. I feel like we've put our finger on it, but it's difficult to see how to roll it back, except to really push to get the people who are in office, who are at the head of these policies, who are enacting these policies, and push them out. Jeff Hoops wouldn't be able to do this if he wasn't able to make these behind the closed door deals. I mean, one of the things is Virginia has home rule. So literally there will be no independent audit. There is no need for there to be an independent audit to see what they've agreed on. It's a handshake behind those closed doors. And the residents of Milton have a right to know more about it. But we actually have a Milton resident with us, because just like we do on our regular show, we always try to make sure to listen to people who are affected by what we report. And I think he is very relevant. His name is Caleb Dial, and he was the victim of a bogus arrest by Milton police last year. Hopefully, Cam, you can pull up that clip for us of Caleb.
Caleb had called police to his parents' home after a dispute with a relative, but it's what happened when Milton police arrived that is more revealing. A case of police seemingly fabricating an arrest that forces us to examine how this police department operates. Watch the video on our screen as the officer arrives. Caleb sits on the porch quietly waiting. As the officer approaches, he tells Caleb he's putting him in handcuffs for so-called officer safety. As Caleb told us in an interview, he was surprised by the move, but what's even more stunning is how the officer describes the same sequence of events in a sworn statement under oath. Let's watch, and as we do, I'm going to read what the officer claimed happened.
Yeah, that's fine. Not under arrest.
I know.
I understand. What's going on, Todd?
I observed the defendant struggling to stand. As I began to speak with the defendant, he became very agitated and kept on raising his voice at me. I asked him several times to calm down and then decided to detain him for officer safety. Really? Is this really what happened? Does Caleb appear agitated? Does he sound disrespectful to the officer? Let's continue.
Okay. I understand. What's going on? Talk to me.
My father and I are arguing.
Okay. All right. Let's walk this way.
Anything on you need it?
I then walked over to my cruiser with him and tried to ask him what happened. He continued to raise his voice at me and became even more agitated. The defendant then became very irate and pushed me with his shoulder and tried to pull away from me. I asked him to calm down, quit yelling, and get into the cruiser. He got very aggressive once again and was trying to pull away. I asked one more time and then assisted him into my cruiser. Okay. I want you to think about what you just saw and compare that to what the officer wrote. I mean, does his narrative of the events bear any resemblance to what happened? In journalism, we have a word we use when the depiction of an event diverges entirely from what actually happened. The word is fiction.
Yes, well, I had to go a little hard there because it was just so obvious that the officer completely fabricated that, and it's so distressing to see that, especially when you know someone has the power of a badge and a gun. But fortunately, we're going to be joined by Caleb. So Caleb, please come on in. Tell us how you're doing.
Great. How are you?
Really good, thank you. And thank you so much for joining us tonight on the live stream.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So first, before we talk about your arrest, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about the Milton police in general. I mean, we've had dozens of people who have contacted us who've complained about them, but they're also terrified to speak out. A lot of them won't speak on the record with us. They're afraid to do public interviews, or they're afraid to even have their name mentioned. Do you know why people would be so scared to speak out?
It's understandable why, especially if you're living in Milton, which I don't live there anymore. I live in Charleston, but it's just a small town, and some cops have little hangout spots that they'd like to sit around, and I can understand why some people would be a little bit afraid, especially if they live closer to those areas where the cops like to hang out. I heard you mention, or like, I think it's ironic that they're taking and wing up three times the normal amount over the last couple of years, because even growing up, whenever I was a child, like, we knew that going through Milton, you had to walk on eggshells essentially, because they'd pull you over even if you're going like half a mile to 1 mile over the speed limit.
Wow, that's just so sad that people are afraid to speak out, and that people are being pulled over for such minimal traffic infractions, because that really adds up. I mean, if you're living paycheck to paycheck and you get hit with a couple $100s worth of traffic tickets and fines, it can really put you in a hole that's difficult to get out of. Now, I do want to talk about what happened to you. How has it affected you, that arrest? And I also think there was a media piece about your arrest. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so my arrest affected me in a couple different ways. First, socially, it had a pretty big social impact because the Milton Police Department has a habit of posting or plastering people's mugshots all over their Facebook page whenever they do an arrest, no matter how big or small or petty the arrest is. They're so proud of it, and they like to display it with open arms. And I'm sorry, I don't really know where I was going with that.
Oh, no
The,
worries. No
no,
worries. I mean, I remember when I saw that mainstream media news piece, how upsetting it would be. It's bad enough that people were getting, their mugshots, pretty much one of the worst moments of your life, posted on Facebook. And then they have this whole piece that was basically a press release from the Milton Police Department, and they just put it there. And even though those charges against you are dismissed, it's not going down. So anytime someone puts your name in Google, they see that arrest. I mean, that's got to have a terrible impact, whether it's on jobs or, your romantic life. Someone looks you up online and go out on a date with you and they see, oh, this arrest and it's very public. So, I mean, this has to have had a negative impact on you.
yeah, it has. Whenever I first got arrested and got out, and then I started going to work, people were asking me like, they just assumed that it had to do with something between like me and a female and like me hitting a female, just because it said like domestic dispute in the original post. So people tried to like piece together their own little version of a story that never actually happened. And that was pretty annoying because at the time, whenever my case was active and my lawyer that I had at the time was representing my criminal case, I had to sign a contract stating that I wasn't able to talk about the case while it was active. So people would come up to me and say all those things, and I wouldn't be able to say anything defending myself. I'd just have to like keep quiet and like move forward away from it. But eventually, the court cases actually ended up getting in the way of my training classes at the time, because the job that I was working, I just got hired at prior to getting arrested. And then the day that I got bailed out, the day after that I got bailed out, I actually started my training. Well, I had missed over 16 hours of training hours just for the court cases alone. And I ended up having to be let go from that job. And if I'm going to be honest, I kind of got heavier into my drinking actually around that time, and ended up having to go to treatment. And that's not, some people might be embarrassed to admit that, but I'm really not. It's just now I do run I run a sober living house, and I've changed my life around and stuff. It's just that event, it served kind of like as a catalyst for a lot of my mental health to just spiral downhill.
You know what? I really appreciate you being so open and honest about that. I think it's really important to understand that there is a serious emotional impact that comes from that. First off, it's terrible that because it's a domestic disturbance, people assumed that you hit a woman, which is a terrible reputation to have. It's very hard to live down. I think we know an example of that in the mainstream media now. And then, of course, on top of that, if you have any sort of addiction issues, or, you're in recovery, to have your life set back in that way, to lose a job, to not be able to continue your education in the way that you wanted to not be able to prosper and to improve in your livelihood, that can force you back into bad habits. So I'm just so happy for you that you haven't let that push you backward, and that you're actually helping other people get over those problems. So I just think you really should be congratulated for that, for not letting this completely derail your life, because it really could have. And so we're really happy for you. And I want you to know that Stephen reached out to that media organization to get a correction. Isn't that right, Stephen?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I actually asked them for comment twice about why they hadn't retracted that statement, but I think it shows, or that story, but I think it shows why, the mainstream media cannot be trusted many times to cover police. Because as someone told us, and I don't know if this is true, but they said that down there, the police tell the media what to say. Is that true?
I think it's more so the journalists don't really have the proper integrity that they should to follow up on actual facts of a situation. And instead, they just take things for what they look like and at face value, and they don't really like to follow up on it. Now, I'm not saying there aren't any good journalists in the area, because there are. It's just the integrity really isn't there.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I think, Tay, did you want to ask another question, or do you want me to? No, I mean, I think, I guess for people who who aren't from Wilton or aren't from that area. You know, we've been talking about this hotel and about the development. I mean, do you think in an area like Milton, it will actually work to will people travel to this part of the country? I mean, and just give us a little sense of what it's like there, what people have to struggle with and what kind of struggles they have and why policing is such a big problem for them.
So there are a little bit over 2,000 residents in the town of Milton, and it's juxtaposed in between the city of Hurricane and the city of Barbersville. And inside of the town of Milton, there are just some fast food restaurants, a strip mall, and a couple funeral homes and a school. And realistically, I think that it's going to be terrible for the town just because it's going to be a waste of space, a waste of resources, because the only people that are, West Virginia is if I'm not mistaken, the poorest state in the nation. So there aren't very many people that come to vacation to West Virginia, and B, the amount of rich people that are here, I highly doubt they're going to come to Milton, especially whenever Milton already has a reputation for having overzealous cops or cops that are bullies. Like, I'm sure that there are people that are in the higher class that are going to look at something like that and take that into account. So I honestly don't think that the project will get finished because it's had a lot of they've changed the plans a lot, and they've had to remove a lot of stuff from the original plans. And I don't know the specificities of that, but I think it's a poor decision for the town to have allowed it, because that facility, Morris Memorial, it could have been changed to a whole lot of different things. Like, I might be biased saying this, but it would have done very well as a treatment facility for people who are wanting to get sober. But that's something I don't see the council ever approving.
Yeah. Wow. That to me, what you just said there is exemplar of everything that we're talking about. It was interesting because that facility was built in the 1930s by the federal government to treat young children who were suffering from polio. And you have a state that has been, disproportionately affected by the horrible opioid crisis. And if the federal government had stepped in, or someone stepped in and said, let's build a treatment facility for people, I think that would have been a great gesture towards a very constructive, thing for the people of Milton. I'm really glad you brought that up. And I think that just shows that maybe you should be running Milton instead of the people who are there now. But unfortunately, that's not what they're doing. And I think, it could be a shame, because as I said before, if the hotel doesn't work, then the people of Milton are going to be on the hook, which is just, to me, unfathomable. But I guess my last question would be, and then Tay, you step in, but why do the people in Milton, they seem to, the Milton city government puts bad drinking water on all these tickets, but they seem to have the same people in place. Are the people in the city just afraid to push back, or is there so much power in the council? Like, what's the mentality in the city?
I think it's a mixture of stuff. Uninformed voters is, I think, a big part of it. People vote. A lot of people in Milton. Okay, so let me give you an idea of the demographics. There are a lot of people that are older in age in Milton and kind of stuck in their ways, and a lot of people from small towns like that, they vote along the lines of how their family has voted. I guess it's kind of like a generational kind of like vote mentality. I think it's also people don't have the resources or the knowledge of how to push back. So I guess it's uninformed ignorance also, which that's not like a hash on any of the town members of Milton. Ignorance is just not it's ignoring something that's in front of you, and sometimes some people don't have the they shouldn't be accountable for their own ignorance because of how they were raised.
Tay, you want to take it from here?
just want to thank you just for being so forthright and honest. Like I said, there's so many people in Milton who have had terrible experiences with the police there, but they just haven't felt like they could come forward or put their name on the record or share the details of their story for fear of being recognized later. So I just want to thank you for standing up for the community in the way that you have. We really appreciate you, Caleb.
It's no problem. I honestly, anything to make that department come to justice, whether that means regurgitating the officers that are there right now and switching them out with new ones, or putting them through a lot more rigorous, better cultural sensitivity training, and better models on how to like just act and interact with the community directly, because there should not be a disparity between how the civilians feel in the town versus I'm sorry, how the civilians fear for their safety in regards to the cops. There just people shouldn't have that relationship with the police. The police should be there to help the community feel safe, and that's just not the direction that the Milton police are taking it with the town members. And I would like to see that change within my lifetime, at least.
Well, I think you made really excellent points that there, at the very least, needs to be retraining, that the police need to learn about de-escalation techniques, and that perhaps the profit incentive that has been instilled by the policies of the city council should be reversed. And I just want to say that I think that Caleb's experience is one of the best examples of why this type of policing, and having it coupled with a lack of economic opportunity, creates so much concern and consternation with our criminal justice system. I mean, when you look at Milton, I see a city where you can't drink water without possibly getting sick. You can't walk down a street or drive without a taillight out, without being worried that you're going to be accosted by a police officer. And what is clear is that emphasizing both aggressive policing and tax breaks for the rich, that the town has clear priorities that seem to have little to do with making people happier or healthier or free. Stephen, that's my thoughts. What do you think?
Yeah, and you know what Caleb points out is that you have a lot of aggressive policing creates a diminishment of political efficacy. You know, that it creates a problem where, you know, policing has so much power that people are afraid to exercise their political rights. But I, for one, am willing to vote for Caleb if he runs for mayor. But the only problem is I don't live in Milton. So
yes.
But I think right now we should officially start this here, a campaign, a write-in campaign to get a younger man.
I love that, Stephen.
Because I think already made some good policy suggestions. So let's start that campaign right now. Anybody who's watching
Caleb
this,
campaign.
If you're from Milton, write in Caleb's name, and
that's
maybe a political career will be born.
Honestly, someday I wouldn't mind doing something like that, because I feel very strongly about the way that a lot of politicians take their job in office, and I think they take it like it's some sort of entitlement to them, as opposed to it being a privilege. Like being able to be a politician should be a privilege, because you're working for the people as their voice, and not enough politicians do that.
Absolutely. So you can see, hopefully this will be the beginning of it tonight, right, Taya? But I think, Taya, why don't you, we should just wrap up with you talking about political efficacy, because that's something you've done a lot of research on.
Oh, absolutely. And before I talk about political efficacy, I just wanted to say thank you so much for everyone for your comments and questions to the live chat. You might have noticed that my eyes have been darting over occasionally. That's because I'm trying to look at your comments, throw some of them up while I can. And I just want to say that I appreciate so much everyone who took the time to donate, everyone who took the time out of your busy day to just be with us here tonight, because I know that means that you really do care about justice and fairness and accountability in this country. So I just want you to know how much I appreciate you all who have been in this live stream tonight. So, but I just want to say that what Stephen mentioned about political efficacy, that's a real measurable and quantifiable thing. What we have seen is that, and there have been studies on this, I don't have the links, but if someone's really interested, I can come back and pin the links in the comments for you. But there have been studies that have shown that when people are arrested, it affects their political efficacy, meaning that they're much less likely to vote, that they're much less likely to believe that the government feel that they have any sort of influence or power over the government. They're much less likely to participate in any aspect of the democratic process. So what happens is even just being pulled through the criminal justice system once can mean that you might never vote again in your life, that you might never try to run for office, and that you might believe that the government doesn't support you at all. And that's terrible because that's taking away your power. That's disenfranchising you. That's essentially, and there are entire communities who have been disenfranchised and disempowered in this way. There are so many people who believe that they don't have any influence over their government and that it doesn't serve them. They may be right about that part, but also that they can't change it. And what I'm hoping is that that people will recognize that they can actually change it, that they can make a difference. But political efficacy, that's a real thing. And it's taken away every time someone is unjustly arrested.
Reasons we focus on policing, because as we can see in Milton, you might say to people who are watching this, why do you care about a town of just 2,500 people? Well, Milton is America's problem writ large, because as we said, we have very parallel problems in Baltimore, a big emphasis on policing. I'm sure there are lots of people here who are watching or in small towns. You sit on your main street and you see this big, huge SUV, nice brand new car for your police department go driving by, and you wonder, why haven't they fixed the park? Or why is my trash pickup only once every 3 weeks? And that's because, in this country, in the way that we make public policy, policing, because of its role in inequity and its role in inequality and its role in creating, a sort of a carve out for wealthier people, policing gets a lot of money that it probably doesn't need. So that's why political efficacy is important, because policing, in order to maintain that sort of unfair advantage and that unfair funding advantage, attacks political efficacy. That's what we see in Milton. That's why Milton's important, because every other city struggles with this idea, of equity, of good public policy, what makes sense. Caleb's idea was, instead of building a luxury hotel, what about we build a place for people who have suffered from this opioid crisis? In fact, let's get the same people that killed everybody with the opioid pills to pay for the goddamn place. I mean, is that really too much to ask? So I think we need to look at how bad public policy is forged at the end of a badge. And that's why we looked at Milton. And that's why it's really, really, really important to pay attention to things like policing, because there's a lot going on underneath the surface. And if you don't, if you don't think that your town needs a luxury hotel, but actually needs places for people to be taken care of who have suffered because of inequity, then then maybe this isn't the show for you. But that's what we focus on, right, Taya?
Absolutely. That's what we're here for. That's what this whole process is about. I mean, I hope that what we've presented you here on this live stream has been productive and even a helpful form of public interest journalists, because we have spent hours and hours petitioning public officials and filing FOIA requests to obtain these reports. It's called process journalism, but we consider it a form of public service. And what's most telling about it is that it reveals just how much of the decisions that are made that affect your lives are hidden from you, they're kept from you, and they're done behind closed doors. I mean, how many deals involving public resources and your futures are done where you never see them, with a handshake behind closed doors? I mean, Stephen, you would agree, right?
Well, listen, one of the things I found by going through all the documents and comparing the reporting on the hotel and the deal and the money behind it was that there was tons of really important details missing, like how much the land was sold for, right? And some other things. So
$20.
Right.
Let me just repeat, in case anyone missed it at the beginning, the land that Jeff Hoops, former CEO of Black Coal Jewel, which he bankrupted, was able to buy this incredible piece of land in Milton, West Virginia for $20. How many acres was it, Stephen?
Well, it was 173 acres. 173 acres that belonged to the people of Milton.
Yes.
And it ends up belonging to one man. I think that's very interesting. Why one man ends up with that property and not the rest of the city. So yes, it is something that we're going to focus on and keep pounding away at. We will find other Miltons and we'll report them, but Milton is just part of a larger picture.
Yes, that's absolutely our goal. And that's one of the reasons why we're doing a little fundraising tonight, is because we want to actually not just FOIA requests from a distance, but we actually want to go to the towns. We actually want to travel and go there and talk to people in person and see for ourselves what is going on. We want to be on the ground to help. And I know we're just we're just a small crew, but we really want to do this. And we know it's kind of funny, but as a girl from a relatively big city, I thought bad policing was a problem you only saw in urban areas. I had no idea how many small towns and rural areas were really suffering from bad and corrupt policing. But now that I do know, I want to help. I want to be a part of that reporting. And I have seen that, unfortunately, there's been a loss of a lot of local newspapers. And then there's some mainstream media organizations that never did that type of reporting at all. So I want to help out how I can. And I know Stephen does too. Right,
Yeah,
Stephen?
yeah. I mean, the thing to remember is that we, because of the way the Real News is structured, it's a very unusual media organization. Tay and I were able to go through these documents, be patiently wait for them. You know, if I worked at one of the newsrooms, I worked like corporate media newsrooms, they'd be like, forget about Milton, move on. You know, you got something else to cover. But here at the Real News, our editors and our managers supported us getting those documents, paying for those documents, going through those documents, reading those documents, and taking the time to just digest what they were telling us and report back to the people of a city of only 2,500. If you think the mainstream media is going to do that kind of work, that labor-intensive hours and hours long work, I think we all know who watches that that's not going to happen. And that's what makes the Real News so, it makes it unique, is the fact that we've done this. Some of you may have watched our documentary on the city of Pocomoke, a city of 4,000 people, about the firing of the first Black police chief. We spent 6 years covering that and turning it into a documentary. Similarly with Milton, we have covered it multiple times because it's important. Every life counts, every person who watches our show counts, and every story counts. And it's not to us about just trying to find the biggest audience. We want to find the stories, the most critical stories that represent what's really going on. And that's why Milton is so critical to us. And that's why it's so wonderful to have a place like the Real News that's a resource for the public anywhere. You know, Tay and I don't care where the city is, what state. We've reported from all over this country. But, you know, we have the privilege, and I will call it a privilege, to take the time to look into a small town like Milton and try to give the information to the people of that city that they're not being told for their benefit. Because, you know, transparency is pretty important. I think we can all say that.
Absolutely. And since we actually have done a full hour, I think we should wrap up the live stream. And at the very, very end, I'm going to say hello to my Patreons and shout out a few names like Shane Bushta and Pineapple Girl. If you're out there, I know you are Shane Bushta, but if you're out there, Pineapple Girl, thank you for being a Patreon super friend. So I
want to say special thanks to Michael Willis for telling me to preach. I appreciate that. I'm glad someone noticed I was getting into my preaching mode about
That's true.
I am a independent media evangelical. Okay, that's what I am. Wherever I go and anyone wants to talk to me, I will preach independent media because I think it is one of the most important institutions in this country. So if you want someone to come to your live stream and preach independent media, just give me a call.
Yeah, preach independent media and of course police accountability. You will proselytize. And I appreciate it, actually, very much so. So I do want to thank everyone who has joined us for this special investigative live stream. We really do appreciate every single one of you. We appreciate your support and your comments and that you care about holding government accountable. And this is what it's about. It's about holding government accountable on every level. And one of the most important levels is with law enforcement. It is you that make this show possible. Without you, we'd just be shouting into the dark. Without your watching, your commenting, your participating in the live stream and doing the same for our other reports, none of this reporting investigative journalism would happen. If you didn't reach out to me and Stephen, we wouldn't know about Milton. We wouldn't know about these other small towns. We wouldn't know about these problems. So you reaching out to us helps fuel what we do. And of course, a few donations do as well. So I just do want to let you know that we will be posting all the documents related to this report for you to read. We will have it on the Real News website with a longer piece that really explains very well exactly what Jeff Hoops is doing as he's building the Grand Patrician Luxury Hotel, as well as potentially 3 gated communities. For who in Milton, I'm not sure. But if there's anything that we missed in these documents or in these details, let us know. We want to collect as much information as possible. So if there's anything we overlooked or if there's information you have that can help us, please share it with us. We appreciate it. And I just want to give a really quick shout out to a couple of my patrons, Stephen Butcher and Blibbits and Cindy King and Dante Kipte Small and Sescal Samian and John Martinez and Pineapple Girl and Keith Bernard Morgan, Joe Six, Gary T, Ryan Pantilla, Mark William L, Kyle Rapp, Guy Berliner, Shane Bush again, Calvin McKay, Alan Judd, Trey Palmer, Umesh Henadia. Oh, gosh, I'm really sorry if I messed up your name. Let me try one more time. Umesh Hendania. That sounds better. Yes.
Taya,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Are you there? Can you hear me? Listen, I'm going to go back outside. I think I've done enough inside, so I hope everyone understands that I'm kind of like a outdoor kind of guy. I like to be outside holding a microphone. If you come to Baltimore, you see some old white guy walking around with a microphone, that would be me. So I want to say, everyone, thank you. We love all of you just as much as
be free, my little
but
bird.
I got to go back outside. Okay, so I'll see you guys. And if you need me, I'll be out in the street there, okay?
Yes, indeed, he will. And let me just say thank you to a few more patrons: John Polachek, Ryan, Lacey R, Rod Bennett, Andrea Juliet O, RBMH, Siggy Young, Stephen J, Celeste Dupuis S, PT, Talia B, Joel Armstrong, Ronald H, Tamara Anderson, Artemis LA, Jimmy Touchdown, and TrueTube Live. So I managed to get that all out there. I want to thank you all again for your help, for your donations, and just for sticking around. And like I said, really caring about police accountability, government accountability, and justice and fairness for your fellow citizens. I do not take that for granted. You guys really care about justice and fairness for others. And I really respect that and appreciate it. So I just want to thank each and every one of you for joining us tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all in the live chat next Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time. We'll have another PAR for you, and I'll be there. I hope you will too. Take care, and thanks again.